The second millennium BC marks the transition from the Middle to the Late Bronze Age. Its first half is dominated by the Middle Kingdom of Egypt and Babylonia. The alphabet develops. Indo-Iranian migration onto the Iranian plateau and onto the Indian subcontinent propagates the use of the chariot. Chariot warfare and population movements led to violent changes at the center of the millennium. A new order emerges with Greek dominance of the Aegean and the rise of the Hittite Empire. The end of the millennium sees the transition to the Iron Age. World population begins to rise steadily, reaching some 50 million towards 1000 BC. Overview. Middle Bronze Age, spending much of their energies in trying to recuperate from the chaotic situation that existed at the turn of the millennium. The most powerful civilizations of the time, Egypt and Mesopotamia, turned their attention to more modest goals. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt and their contemporary kings of Babylon, of Amorite origin, brought good governance without much tyranny, and favored elegant art and architecture. Farther east, the Indus Valley civilization was in a period of decline, possibly as a result of intense, ruinous flooding. Egypt and Babylonia's military tactics were still based on foot soldiers transporting their equipment on donkeys. Combined with a weak economy and difficulty in maintaining order, this was a fragile situation that crumbled under the pressure of external forces they could not oppose. Unrest of the 16th century. About a century before the middle of the millennium, bands of Indo-European invaders came from the Central Asian plains and swept through Western Asia and Northeast Africa. They were riding fast two-wheeled chariots powered by horses, a system of weaponry developed earlier in the context of plains warfare. This tool of war was unknown among the classical civilizations. Egypt and Babylonia's foot soldiers were unable to defend against the invaders. In 1630 BC, the Hyksos swept into the Nile Delta, and in 1595 BC, the Hittites swept into Mesopotamia. Late Bronze Age. The peoples in place were quick to adapt to the new tactics, and a new international situation resulted from the change. Though during most of the second half of the second millennium BC several regional powers competed relentlessly for hegemony, many developments occurred. There was new emphasis on grandiose architecture, new clothing fashions, vivid diplomatic correspondence on clay tablets, renewed economic exchanges, and the new kingdom of Egypt played the role of the main superpower. Among the great states of the time, only Babylon refrained from taking part in battles, mainly due to its new position as the world's religious and intellectual capital. The Bronze Age civilization at its final period of time displayed all its characteristic social traits. Low level of urbanization, small cities centered on temples or royal palaces, strict separation of classes between an illiterate mass of peasants and craftsmen, and a powerful military elite. Knowledge of writing and education reserved to a tiny minority of scribes, and pronounced aristocratic life. Near the end of the second millennium BC, new waves of barbarians, this time riding on horseback, wholly destroyed the Bronze Age world, and were to be followed by waves of social changes that marked the beginning of different times. Also contributing to the changes were the Sea Peoples, ship-faring raiders of the Mediterranean. Civilizations, kingdoms and dynasties. The civilizations, kingdoms and dynasties in this section are organized according to the United Nations Geoscheme events. The events in this section are organized according to the United Nations Geoscheme. It is difficult to pinpoint the exact year or even the correct century for many events of the second millennium BC. c. 2000 BC, SEMA turbine phenomenon originating in the Altai Mountains leads to rapid and massive migrations westward across the Urals into northeastern Europe and eastward into China and Southeast Asia. c. 1700 BC to 1300 BC, palace complex in Knossos, Crete, was built. c. 1600 BC to 1360 BC, Egyptian domination over Canaan and Syria. Inventions, discoveries, introductions. Significant people. The people in this section are organized according to the United Nations Geoscheme. Biblical. The biblical patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, in the Genesis narrative are set in the early to mid-second millennium. The Exodus and Moses are set in the late second millennium. Fiction. The Canadian-American speculative fiction author S.M. Stirling has written a trilogy set in Bronze Age era, circa the 1250s BC. The trilogy describes the conflict between the different factions of the population of the island of Nantucket after an unknown phenomenon transports them into the past, some trying to dominate the world for their own benefit, others trying to better it, and the different Bronze Age civilizations. Accuracy of dates. Please see the article on chronology of the ancient Near East for more discussion regarding the accuracy and resolution of dates for events of the second millennium BC in the Near East. Centuries and decades.